Welcome to the space between. This is where honest conversations live. Be prepared to explore the gap between what we say we do and what really drives growth, creativity, and change. Brought to you by MSQ. Visit msqindex.com to learn more. Join us now as we enter the space between.
Welcome to the next episode of The Space Between, with today's interviews being run by me, supported by Seth. Really happy to welcome Emma Kelly, who is the Global Head of Consulting for Verity RI. So welcome, Emma. We've had a great briefing call, so Seth and I are pretty excited about what we're going to talk about today. But before we kick into some questions, Emma, can you just give us a quick overview of Verity, your role, who you work with, what you do? Just tell us who you are.
Yeah, no problem. So my name is Emma. So I run the consulting team for Verity RI. As a business, we've been going for over 20 years, and our specialism, if you like, and the thing we care about and focus on entirely is unlocking the commercial power of relationships. And we do that for organizations around the world. Our big bias is towards the marketing services sector, where most of us have come from and grown up within, but we also work across other verticals too. My role is to head up that consulting team, as I mentioned. We have 18 consultants globally around the world. And really what we are doing is using a combination of data. So we talk about TRR. So some people listening to this will have heard of that, but it's a client SAP tool. We use lots and lots of data in what we do. We have over 20 years worth of data on client SAT and relationships. And then our job as consultants is to really, I think, often squeeze the juice on it to work out where is the real insight for growth and what do organizations need to do about it. So really, we're really there to kind of catalyze action and impact, hopefully from the feedback, which helps them grow their organization however they wish to.
Brilliant. And what was interesting yesterday, post our briefing call, Seth and I had a chat afterwards saying, data's not really worth anything unless you do something with it, is it? So it was really, and similar to us, we have a whole bunch of data of businesses that have benchmarked their marketing strategy. Unless you do anything with it, it's worth nothing. So it was a real clarification yesterday. So we're going to run in with the first question, which we're going to do a bit of backwards looking, forwards looking, if that's okay with you.
Of course. Yep.
And one of the things we'd really like to talk about is what's the difference you've seen? What's happened to us? Sort of, where were we pre-COVID? What happened with COVID? And where do you think we are today?
Yeah, let's start with COVID. It was a bit of a wild time. It was interesting.
Wild.
Psychologically, it was also really interesting for us in terms of what different shapes we saw in relationships during that time. The first thing I would say is that in that kind of 18-month to 2-year period, 2020 to 2022, we saw ratings really climb fairly steadily, fairly consistently for almost 2 years. And there was a real sense of renewed energy in relationships, interestingly. One of the unintended consequences were that agencies were super quick, super reactive, super flexible, super available. There was high levels of care. There was also high levels of empathy from both agencies and clients, because there was a profound moment that we were all going through and everyone could kind of connect to the empathy of the situation that was going on. So agencies generally did a really brilliant job of leaning in a time of need, which was kind of well acknowledged by clients. What was interesting, though, is it went on for quite a lot longer than agencies expected, obviously, and it became a pretty unsustainable place to be. So what we started to see after about 18 months or so is that things started to drop back down again to where they were pre-COVID. And I think there are three things really that drove that. I think, one is the agencies had to kind of renegotiate what was a sustainable place to be. It'd been like kind of pitch mode for 18 months, some agencies spoke to us about, and they needed to resettle and recalibrate what was reasonable to expect with their clients, and that created some rifts. We also saw the cost of advocacy for teams becoming untenable. So whilst we were measuring client sat, we were also measuring talent satisfaction. And we were seeing the opposite journey in terms of the rating. So as the client sat was rising, teams were feeling more and more kind of burnt really by the situation. So that was going on, and that was obviously playing out in the relationships. And then obviously as the job market opened up post-COVID, we saw mass movement and that destabilized relationships. So what came up had to come down, and indeed that is what happened. I think it's interesting. I think, what's happened since is there is definitely a muscle memory from COVID that I think a lot of agencies are struggling to unlearn or encourage their clients to unlearn. I think clients got a taste, didn't they, for faster and cheaper in that moment. They saw that agencies could rewrite the process overnight, be more agile overnight, be more flexible on kind of ways of working and contracts even. And so I think that left an expectation that needed to be managed.
Yeah.
And
Almost like a reframe of the
yeah,
relationship, would you say, post-COVID?
yeah, recontracting, absolutely. And I think the biggest dynamic that we are often working to mitigate in the room with our clients is what we call transactional drag.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. That was just a great sentence yesterday. Tell us what that
Yes.
means to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been talking about that since COVID, really. But I think it's always been present, but I think it's kind of exacerbated it. I mean, what we mean by transactional drag is the diversion, the distraction of attention away from relationships towards the short-term tactical and transactional. So I think in the rush to react for clients where teams are thinner than they've been before, where things are more project-based, perhaps where they were retainers before, where skills have perhaps been undermined, relationship skills have perhaps been undermined post-COVID. What we've seen is that the kind of body language goes down and in, really. The field of vision gets less narrow, and it becomes about the urgent over the important, the tactical, the transactional, the next thing, the next task, as opposed to looking up and out towards a broader sense of partnership. So, we see this in the room all the time when we're working with client feedback with agencies. And I suppose our job is to try and help them to just slow things down a bit and take a strategic look back at what is this partnership about? What are we trying to drive with this partnership? How do we need the relationship to fuel that? As opposed to come up with a kind of list of tasks and the next to do, if you like.
Is it a case that, before pre-COVID, agencies were probably, more strategic in their thinking, and they've kind of lost their strategic smarts because they kind of really leaned into that tactical, agile, fast-moving way of thinking, and they haven't got that back?
Yeah, and I think it's not that I think things were perfect before. I think transactional drag in a service industry, in a cost-pressured service industry has ever been thus. But I think there's a number of things going on that are exacerbating that. And I think, agencies have been cut massively. I mean, often we're seeing senior headcount cut out of agency structures at the moment. So I think we're seeing a juniorisation of leadership, definitely. And we're seeing the core relationship skills that we may have grown up with, that we may have learned by osmosis, by being in agencies from a grad or exec all the way up, have been diminished. And I also think that, the strategic smarts, to use your point, have been, those resources have been stretched very thin, I mean, frankly. And I think there's a posture in some agencies right now that is very challenged by a lack of psychological safety, because the amount of change going on is significant. But the problem for that, to your point on strategic smarts, is that is exactly what clients are wanting and expecting more and more of, particularly as they themselves struggle in their businesses.
And I think it's interesting, like what one of the things we heard, we're out round the traps all of the time. And one of the things that we really heard, just to pick up on your juniorisation piece, was, they'd get rid of someone senior for 5 or 4 or 3 junior people, because it was like more bums on seats.
Yeah.
And the reality is that's the wrong thing to do. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we definitely saw that post-COVID, right? Because I think, we saw a couple of things going on. We saw cuts happening in reaction to budgets, but we also saw people jumping ship from one agency to another at quite a hefty kind of increment in terms of where they are in the hierarchy, because everyone was fighting for the same talent. So, I mean, I definitely agree. There's a short term and a long term to that, isn't there? There's the fitting the immediate need, and then there's the long term implications of that. So, yeah, I mean, definitely we have seen that. And I think the juniorisation is on 2 levels. I think one is the seniority, and the experience to really lead clients. And I think the other is those softer relationship skills, which are also somewhat lacking, because you've had junior talent, of course, join agencies remotely. and have a different relationship to work, and also to kind of, you know, the basic skills of relationships, because they're learning in a different kind of world perhaps we.
I sort of don't also think, you know, and I am going to say this, aren't I? But I also don't think it's just about relationship. It's about wisdom and knowledge and, you know, what you bring to the table as somebody that's, you know, had a lot of experience. I think so, you know, I really, you know, when we first started talking to you guys, it was something that I really picked up on, because obviously what we're seeing is lots of junior people, and they're looking a bit stumped. They're looking a bit perplexed about the value that they offer. And, you know, that can't be good for them, the agency or the client. I remember sitting on a client service when I first got a client service webinar, and they were trying to encourage the agency staff to pick up the phone to the clients. I mean, it's 101. And they were like, what am I going to say? So I don't think it's just you know, the process or who they are as people. It's actually their knowledge and, you know, and challenging the client a little. That you know, that's nerve-wracking when you don't have the wisdom or the smarts to back it up.
Sure is. It sure is. And, you know, one of the things we've been doing, because what we were seeing post-COVID was that ratings are kind of stabilised, and they still have. So globally, the client sat for an agency is around 8 at the moment. So it's pretty good. And it's been, you know, more or less the same for a while now. What's interesting, though, and particularly post-COVID, is that whilst clients were seemingly quite happy, the ratings are okay, that's okay, we can work with that, the narratives had changed. And so there was a real sense that clients were happy for today. I like my team, they're delivering well for me. But what they weren't saying, or what they were more critical of, was strategic leadership and vision. So the ratings hadn't changed, but the narrative had. So one of the things that we were, I suppose, concerned about was that we were slightly fueling an optimism bias here, that actually everything's okay. There's nothing to look at here. We're safe. We should absolutely be able to grow this business. So what we introduced was a supplementary question around future fitness, because what we were noticing is that there is a difference between relationships which are fit for today versus tomorrow, and better to surface it than not, so that agency teams can think about, you know, the relationship on those two speeds of now and next, if you like. So what we have seen, and I'm sure this is connected to what you're saying, Debbie, is that 1 in 3 senior clients were less confident, rated less confident about the future than they did for today. So things could be okay for today. I like my team, they're delivering for me, but I don't know if they can evolve to be a future partner for me. I don't necessarily have the confidence that they have the people and the expertise, or perhaps the tools and the tech and the products, or perhaps the vision, which is the highest order quality we saw in the feedback, to really unlock the kind of future of my business with me and for me. So absolutely, we're also seeing that borne out in the data.
And is that a sort of a capability, an operational or a structural issue within an agency? I mean, an agency, I mean, they are thinking primarily about the now and not about the next. But they really fundamentally need to change how they operate.
Yeah, I mean, there's the 4 levels of it. So what because we asked it, I think, you know, across the majority of our clients across 2024 and 2025. And what we were seeing is that there was an order effect to the clients who had the most confidence in future fitness. And at the base of the pyramid, if you like, if we think about it as a hierarchy, there was obviously the brilliant basics. Because if the operational and executional excellence was poor, I don't want to talk to you about the future, because I need to know the day-to-day. Yeah. And that for some agencies is still a challenge, right? It's a very complex world that some of these agencies are traversing in terms of execution. So the executional layer was the bottom, the fundamental enabler. Then we moved into team and talent. So do I believe I've got the team and the expertise and the chemistry and the know-how, both for now and next, to believe that we can evolve into a future partnership together? Then we get into the world of tools and tech and product and ways of working, which is, you know, I work a lot with media agencies where they're very focused. And then right at the top, and this is always the thing, you know, we encourage agencies not to overlook, is the strategic vision to unlock all of the above in service of the future of the business. So you can have the best tools and tech in the world and the best story and packaging of it. But actually, if the basics are not in place, I don't believe in the talent. If I don't believe you've got the vision to activate it for me and drive it for me, then it's they're nice tools. So there's kind of an order effect, and each agency, I think, we work with different levers, if you like, are different opportunities for them.
And how is that mirrored within a client? Because some clients will obviously be stuck in the now and
Yes.
not look to
Yeah.
the next. So the client presumably has a part to play as well.
Absolutely. I mean, with all of it, they do, don't. I mean, the relationship it should
Yeah.
be a partnership, and absolutely. And we hear some of the same juniorisation. I'm sure you do too. But
Yeah,
we hear
totally.
the same juniorisation parallels going on in client organisations with the lack of experience that agency people are having to work with and decide, frankly, strategically and commercially. Do we invest in these clients to bring them up to the level we need them to, or do we?
Yeah.
How do we work with that? Otherwise, you're right. It takes two to tango.
Yeah,
Right?
and I know. So on from that is that as an agency, you get stuck talking to the marketing team, and you don't have a voice further up
Yeah,
the
the organisation.
chain within the organisation. So you're not talking to the CEO, you're not talking to CFO. Is that an important part of being a sort of an agency which is focusing on next as
Yes,
well?
exactly. And I think it chimes with that thing about that narrowing of vision of transactional drag. And the really great agencies that we work with, we see it in the data, right? Because they map their clients really effectively for now and next.
Yeah.
And so, yes, they have a quorum of clients they work with today, but even when they're building their databases for the survey part of what we do, they're thinking about where are the periphery influencers and stakeholders, or where might the future stakeholders, influencers, or budget holders be. So they're also kind of one eye on next, and having specific and intentional relation strategies with those people, and also including them in the feedback, right? So they can also get what the word on the street is for these individuals. So yeah, I think it's the now and next lens.
I think it's really important, because one of the things that we're hearing a lot as well, because we speak to clients as well as agencies, and the clients are saying to us, hey, we want, where we've got strategic gaps, we want our agencies are partners. And I know when I was in house, I had 2 corporate roles. The first one, we had everything in house. The second one, I had agencies left, right, and centre, and I could not have done my job without these agencies. But you have to let them in. But they're not going to let you in. I would never have let anyone into my exec team, my ELT, that I knew was not going to be strategic or couldn't speak to my CEO. And I think that this is where the agencies now have got choices. And we were talking with someone earlier in the week that they don't choose something's going to be forced on them. And the opportunities for us we are seeing at the moment is, they've got to do whatever they've got to do around AI. They've got to make, but actually what the real opportunity is to make themselves more strategic and look at the juniorisation of the client, and see where they can step into the strategy place. And I think that's when they do move up the food chain that Seth was referring to.
Yeah,
is that something you're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. I would say though that one of the other challenges, which is kind of an invisible force, but I think is really prevalent right now, is psychological safety. Because I think that when we talk about the data we work with as a consultancy, yes, we have the actual tangible client sat data or the talent data and all the benchmarks. But also we're working with other metadata in the room a lot of the time. We're working with what we see, what we feel, what we listen to and hear and pick up, narratives, biases, all those kinds of things in the room that are other data points for us to really decipher what is going on in this organization and what is preventing them from growing, or meaning they're losing a lot of business. What do they need to tap into? And I certainly, because of the amount of restructuring going on within the industry, I would say that even if you are a fairly accomplished and experienced leader, and I work with many of them, particularly lots of global client presidents who I partner with, they've had many years in the business, but there isn't an inherent sense of safety in their organization right now. There are restructures and cuts being made left, right, and centre, as we've seen, particularly in the big holding codes. But even if you're not, you can kind of see it going on around you. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the role that plays in the ability and the confidence for someone to speak out and lead and really challenge a client and have scary conversations with the client about what we think they should be doing.
I loved it when I was a client. They come in and really, polarize my thinking. It was fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that posture many people I'm working with are reflecting how that posture has changed. And my hypothesis, one of those hypotheses, is that it's not even just about their skill set. 'Cause some of them are very skilled and very experienced, but they don't feel safe. It's much easier in this moment to follow the status quo, if you like, or do as asked, as opposed to, what a client kind of says they want versus what they need. It can feel much safer in the current environment to follow that path and to really stick one's head
And
above the parapet.
I think that agencies have got to sort of break out of that thought of always being a supplier.
Yeah.
Haven't they? They've got to move themselves up the value chain, and clients, I'm sure, there's a vested interest in almost keeping your agency as a supplier, because that keeps them keen. It keeps them on suppresses pricing, all of those things. And also, as I say, that sort of that sense of keeping my head down. It's slightly scary out there. I'm dodging bullets. But if you kind of break away from that, move up the value chain, bring in strategy, slow down the process with working with your client, that can only be beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are some clients though who are, I don't know if these are the majority, but there are some clients who I'm hearing of having what I'd call kind of client of choice agendas, which I personally really like, because these are clients who recognize the value in true partnership and the value in a win-win, mutual rewards, and take some full responsibility or some responsibility for their part in the relationship. And I've certainly worked with some agencies where we've got both talent and agency data at the same time, where the client is really bought into this because they want to know how it feels to work on their account. They want to be the best account to work on in that agency. They want to be attracting the great talent.
We've heard that.
They know that will unlock the best for them, and they know it's a win-win. And so the really smart clients, or really relationally intelligent clients, if you like, I think some of them have even, that's an initiative, and who knows whether that's how should we say, kind of that is really kind of believed in and championed through the business, but there is a recognition that to be a great client has immense kind of commercial value for them in the end. So I think you're right. Some clients don't recognize that, but some absolutely do, and really care about how they kind of co-own the partnership to
Emma, when you go into a client, when you and your team go into a client and you've got data, ultimately, how do you help them use that data and sort of reframe? Even the good client relationships need reframing, don't they? And what do you do with agencies when you go in?
Yeah, it's a good shout. So I'd say that by and large, there are two particular types of meeting that I think we run. There will always be many variations, but we work a lot with excos, as you'd imagine, with leadership teams, where I think a lot of the time our primary task is to help them synthesize what really matters in the data to drive growth. Because there's a lot of data in their own business, let alone by the time we've come in with a lot of feedback equally. And what we are there to do, I think, is help differentiate signal from noise, if you like, and really get them to a proper diagnosis of why their business is or isn't growing, or what particularly is at risk for them, even if it's early smoke signals versus the fire, to give them an appraisal, I suppose, of where the biggest opportunities are. And we will do that through the data, of course. We will do that through some of our proprietary tools, which, we can use. We've got a tool, for example, that helps an agency pace set against the highest performers. So again, it just sifts through it all to look at these things and where they stand competitively. And then, of course, what we're also doing is bringing in our observations of the organization to say, for example, we think there's a problem in growth with this account, this account, this account. Here's why, and here's my other perspective on what might be going on here. Be that a limiting internal narrative. This is a team who are a bit stuck in the former glory years of this account, and unless they can get their kind of head into the future opportunity and reframe the narrative that way, it's going to be really hard for you to grow on this piece of business. So we're there working with, as you can see, kind of a web of data and insight that allow us with the leadership team to kind of get them focused.
One of the things I'd like to ask you is, and this is also relates to us in some form, is there's a level of when do they call you in? They realise they're not growing. There's a level of uncomfortableness about hearing what they're not so great at. what type of agencies are doing that? Because, we've had a couple of bits of feedback about, oh, your index is terrifying. Well, actually, it's only going to highlight where you can improve. And I'm assuming you're on the same page as us. So what does if an agency's watching this and they're going, actually, I need to get Verity RI, what should they be feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we focus on risk, but we also focus on how can they socialize best practice. I think for most of our engagements, we're working with them throughout the year anyway. We've been brought in twice or three times a year to help them measure and manage their relationships strategically. So agencies bring us on board because they don't want to rely on hearsay or assumption. They want to measure it, because they believe that's how they manage it. They want to benchmark themselves against the competition and not mark their own homework. And they want to make sure that they are, and I think, maybe this is unconscious, but they want to make sure they are held to account on the action strategies that they drive as a result of the feedback. So we're often working with the kind of leadership team, as I mentioned, to kind of synthesize and direct action at a leadership level. And then we're also working oftentimes with the teams on the ground to fuel kind of micro level change, if you like, that might be about individual clients or individual accounts. So, but I think typically agencies get us in because they want to drive discipline or build a more relationally centric culture as an organization. But I would say that, yes, we spend a lot of time on risk, but often what we're doing is joining the dots within businesses and say, what's so interesting is that, posture is future fitness posture is a problem here. But what I think you should be looking at is this account and this account, because they've got it in spades. And when I think about what they're doing, I notice this, and this, and it's coming up in the feedback. So what can you do that brings and scales that behavior or that approach or that structure over into these accounts? So we're often helping them realize where there are already success stories within their own businesses as a way of mobilizing more of that behavior and scaling it accordingly. So I think that the difference is perhaps we're brought in as a kind of regular pulse, which allows us
a sort of regular outside holding the mirror in terms of
absolutely.
Brilliant.
And you've talked about, in terms of the size of an agency. I mean, you've talked about sort of holding companies. So you work with that size of agency, but what's the sort of minimum size of agency that you'd be?
We work all the way. Yeah, we work across the gamut. I mean, it's interesting for us and it's helpful for us, and hopefully we can be helpful to agencies of all shapes and sizes. So yes, we spend a lot of time with holding companies, but we also work with independent boutique agencies where we might work on a much smaller sample, but nonetheless, our job in the room is the same. Their context would be different, of course, but yeah, no, our belief is our belief in terms of the the commercial power of relationships. So I can certainly think of a number of new independents recently that we've taken on who frankly have got big ambitions to grow, and they know they need to build rigor around this to do that.
So they're not just surviving; they're growing. Sorry,
yeah.
Seth.
So that is quite interesting. So they've from the get-go, they've brought you in. They've said, okay, we're setting up this agency. We now need to sort of benchmark ourselves and ensure that we're having the right type of relationships with clients. So they've started off on that basis.
Yeah, and it may not be from day one, but they're certainly early on into their journey. They've recognised it, and I think that thing about not marking your homework is often really valuable to them. They value an outside voice who can see the market dynamics. I mean, in addition to working with those agencies 2 or 3 times a year, we produce regular reports. We're always going in with industry context. What's the kind of word on the street? What things do we think they should be paying attention to that may be coming their way? So they value that outside perspective, and the fact that we've all come from agencies as consultants, I think, also brings a sense of assurance and credibility that we've in their
you're sticking to your knitting.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a question for me in terms of, I've got a couple of questions left. Just in terms of, are you seeing any trends globally in different countries? Is anything different anywhere else? And I know we're in the UK, but I know Verity RI is global. And any differences you're seeing country by country?
I mean, there are definite cultural nuances. I mean, when we look at our benchmarks, for example, there are real differences in terms of how different cultures feel about relationships, how they feed back in survey systems. So we do see a lot of nuance in that area, which is why we have consultants based in different markets who, consultants in APAC, for example, who understand the difference, whether it's the sense of hierarchy, whether it's the openness to giving critical feedback, and therefore how you approach some of those difficult conversations. So hence why we believe it's important to have associate consultants on the ground in key markets. I would say the trends we tend to focus on, though, are pretty universal. And equally, when we look at pace setting, again, a tool that we have, a varifocal lens, which looks at the 4 drivers of high performance, even when you move out of marketing services, interestingly, into accountancy, into legal, into paper and packaging, into CPG, some of our other verticals, you'll be surprised there are nuances, but some of these things, these big kind of headlines and drivers of high relationships, are pretty universal, even though the nuance underneath them will flex. Of course it will. But so I less at the moment is different than it is similar. But of course there is nuance and context.
Right. Seth, anything else from you? Anything?
No, I was interested. The one question I was going to ask was going back to that sort of now and next in terms of Verity RI itself. I mean, how do you cope with that as an organisation? Because presumably that's very important to you, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we have to practice what we preach in all of this. I mean, that's a brilliant thing about what we do. But it's obviously, our clients also will hold us to account on that too. I mean, we are constantly thinking about that in terms of our stance on AI, as you can imagine, being having a data aspect to what we do. Particularly in my role, I suppose I am thinking about what the future of consultancy looks like and where the value is, particularly as AI comes in, right? I think particularly as it feels like AI could scrape all the data and come up with my own action plan. So, why would I need a consultant is something I'm thinking a lot about in terms of, how do we talk about all the data we work with?
That's the grey hairs and experience, Emma.
Yeah, it is, but it's all the data.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's for human capital. So obviously we are thinking about that, and we are also noticing more and more across different verticals the value in what we do, in terms of beyond marketing services and the applicability of it. So we also are thinking about which other sectors do we think would most benefit from our services. So yes, of course, lots of things.
And in terms of 2026, as we're looking forward to that, I mean, what do you feel that looks like for agencies? Because everyone, I think, had a pretty turbulent time last year. What's your view of Verity RI's view of 2026?
Yeah. And I think, I certainly don't have a crystal ball. I think it would be weird if we had some very definitive predictions of what we think is going to happen. But it is clear that the industry is at an inflection point, right? Isn't it? And I suppose I have to have some faith in the creative reinvention that can come in these moments of turbulence. So I think the change piece is significant. My feeling is, and this is a feeling, is that the agencies who have the real competitive advantage, they focus on product, yes, and we have a lot of agencies we're working with who are very product centric in their outlook for the future of their business. But the ones who will really thrive have an equal attention to the kind of AI or product side of their business and the relational intelligence part of their business. We have different guest speakers come and talk to us all the time, and we had a brilliant behavioural scientist, Crawford Hollingsworth, come in and speak to us 2 weeks ago, and he spoke a lot about human capital in a product-driven environment. And I really like this because I spend a lot of time, for example, with media agencies who are are very product centric in their outlook, and ultimately though are telling the same story, or albeit a different version of the same story. But the ones who really win don't forget the human side of it, because actually that will be the competitive advantage. So I think balancing the two, I think has to be the answer to sustainable growth, as opposed to commoditization of the offering. So I think that's interesting. I think the other thing is that we are seeing, just like we saw in COVID, actually, as client sat has stabilized, the talent experience is getting poorer and poorer, and actually it's its widest point at this point for us. So if the average client sat rating is at 8, the average barometer rating, which is our internal talent sat data point, is at 7.3, and it's at the widest point it's been for some time. So I think, again, agencies who really integrate the talent experience that they want to foster into the, the culture of the organization, into the client experience they want to drive, that see it as two halves of the same coin, I think will also thrive.
They're the winner. Yeah.
Because I think that's often the silent enemy of growth, that, some agencies don't measure it. Many do now, and I think it's often the silent enemy of growth in the room is how these teams are feeling, how they are showing up every day, what stories they are telling themselves and each other about their experience on these accounts. That's often it's often the leading indicator of business loss. Actually often starts there, but it's too often unmeasured, I think.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I think incorporating the talent lens and so oftentimes when we're working on relationship strategies, so oftentimes on accounts anyway, we are taking their business plan, taking their growth plan for that account, and we are helping them build out the relational pillar of it. So how will relationships help me unlock this growth ambition? And a lot of the time what we're doing is saying, let's talk about how teams feel, because this needs to be in there, because it could be the best plan in the world in terms of growth, but if the talent are on the floor, if they've burnt out, if they don't feel positive about it, if they don't feel safe, if they've been perhaps on the business too long, whatever those things are, it will be very hard to achieve. So I think, again, just bringing that right into view as an equal importance as the client experience, I think will be critical.
Brilliant.
Amazing.
Emma, what a great conversation. I knew it was going to be from our briefing session. You've covered everything. Thanks so much. Just closing, where can people find you? I know obviously LinkedIn, but also anything they can download, anything they can access from your website. Tell us where they can get to you.
Yeah, so we obviously have the website verityri.com. LinkedIn is also great, as you mentioned, to find us. If you do go to the website, so as I mentioned, periodically through the year, we produce industry reports, a kind of state of the nation. So our clients get this more, regularly throughout the year, but we also publish them, wider. And at the end of last year, we published the relationship report, which was our view on the 60 of the highest performing agencies. That would be a good place to start if you're interested in what we've got to say.
Brilliant.
That's on our website.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Emma. Really lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, and you both.
See you soon.
Yeah, see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you very much,
Seth.
Emma.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Space Between, where honest conversations just came to life. Brought to you by MSQ. Visit msqindex.com to learn more. Now, go forth and enter your own space between.